You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to another free agency edition of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today we are dialing in to the Arizona Cardinals and what I would like to see them do going through free agency. We're going to talk some re-signings. We're going to talk free agent additions. So I invite you, Cardinals fans, and even if you're not a Cardinals fan, maybe somebody who just enjoys the league, comment down below. Let me hear from you all. Who do you want to see your team keep? Who would you allow to see your team walk and maybe going after and targeting in free agency? But like I said, we'll start with the re-signings first, and then we'll dip our way into some of the additions I'd like to see from the Cardinals. But with an estimated $71.3 million in cap space as of this recording, that is courtesy of Spotrac, where I'm getting all my free agent numbers from. For the Cardinals, this is a roster that did, I would say, a lot more than anyone really anticipated last year, and a team that might even be somewhat closer to being a playoff contender than other people outside of Arizona may realize. So with this team set up the way they are right now, not a ton of super pressing free agent re-signing potential, I would say, but there are a couple of guys that I really like that could walk this offseason that I would like to see the Cardinals retain. And that first one's going to be left guard Evan Brown. Spotrac estimating that he'll get something along the lines of like a $4.7 million 1-year deal. I honestly, that's probably the ballpark, at least numbers wise, for the dollar amount. For years, I wouldn't be shocked to see Arizona maybe even give him 2, potentially even 3 years. Because when you look at what he did this season for the Cardinals and where he was last season for the Seahawks, consistency and availability are two of the best things that you can note about a player, and Evan Brown fits both of those in my eyes, starting all 17 games for the Cardinals this year in 2024, playing a whopping 1,070 snaps along the way. PFF credit him for only 2 sacks allowed this season here, and for an offensive line that honestly had a pretty decent amount of success running the football, he was a big piece of that as well, especially with a lot of issues going on at the right guard position on the other side of the O-line opposite of him. This is a guy that I do think is worth keeping around for Arizona, and it's not something that's going to break the bank. And again, $5 million a year, let's just round the number, $5 million a year for 1 or 2 years to see if he can continue to be that guy at the left guard spot as you try to figure out what you're going to do on the opposite side of the same position on the O-line for the right guard side. I definitely don't see why it's not worth at least bringing him back on a 1-year deal or maybe even a 2-year deal just in case things look really good next year and you at least have him under contract for another season. So I really like the idea of keeping Evan Brown around, especially when it comes to offensive line. Consistency and availability are key. And in a league right now that is kind of struggling with offensive line play throughout, there's only a handful of teams that have really good offensive line play week in and week out. And if you can find a guy who's always available and playing fairly well for you, I definitely think he's worth keeping. The other guy that I'm looking at here, and I'm curious to see what Cardinals fans have to say on this one, is going to be linebacker Kyzir White. Spotrac's estimating for him to get just under $6 million per year at 5.8 in a 2-year deal. White struggled dropping back against the pass at certain points during this season, but he's always played the run extremely well, and for the most part, he's actually been pretty good dropping back. He just had some issues this last year, coming from one system into Arizona, maybe just some, whatever it may have been, growing pains, it could be anything. When you look at the number at about $6 million per year in a 2-year deal, something like that, maybe you're paying him a 2 or 3-year deal, whatever it may end up being, I definitely think this is a guy that's worth keeping around if you pair him with somebody else to work on the interior of that defense alongside him. So for Kyzir White's sake, great run defender. Maybe he gets better when it comes to dropping back, but I mean, you look at the numbers that NFL Pro has listed for him with 63 defensive stops, and he also had 137 tackles on the year, which was good for 15th most in the NFL. I look at White as a guy that you keep him, but the idea is that you're going to bring somebody alongside of him to help mask some of his weaknesses here. But I mean, for somebody to come in with the price point that he has and play as well as he did, especially against the run on that side, and just overall as a pursuing linebacker, he does a great job of getting to where the football is and making a play. You get a pass coverage kind of linebacker, a guy that's maybe more focused on that end of deal to play the drop back situations that you need him to, and you keep Kyzir. Consistency stays within the middle of that defense. And again, at $6 million a year, you can't really go wrong when the salary cap is potentially going to push north of $280 million this year. That's basically pennies on the dollar at that point. One other guy that I have, and this is more of just honorable mention, Baron Browning. Now, this is one where if the Cardinals just, they make a trade for Baron Browning, see what you get out of him. You don't necessarily get a ton out of him, and you're willing to allow him to walk because you didn't give up a ton for him. I totally understand it. However, Browning, when he's healthy, in my eyes, is a pretty productive pass rusher for someone who hasn't necessarily been a starter at any point throughout his career, but has put up some decent numbers getting after the quarterback. The problem is the whole if he's healthy situation there. He's missed at least 3 games or more in every single season of his career to this point here, and it feels like he has a hard time of just consistently being on the football field and allowing him to build that momentum because you're constantly on the field playing week in and week out and practicing week in and week out. It's unfortunate because I do like Baron Browning, especially at the outside linebacker position as a pass rusher, but it's one of those things where are you willing to just bring him in for another year? Cheap deal. Spotrac's looking at like roughly around a $5 million or so, give or take, depending on the number for what he's going to receive in free agency this year. So whether it's with Arizona or somewhere else. But for me, this is one where I'm okay seeing them walk. But if you want to keep him for depth's sake and maybe just kind of see what he could potentially give you with another year in the system, I guess I understand that. But again, honorable mention, not somebody I'm banging the table for. But if he sticks around, I like it. If he doesn't stick around, I'm also okay with it because I do have somebody else in mind as far as a free agent target goes that we'll get into in a moment. Now, flipping into that conversation, free agent signings. Who are the Arizona Cardinals going to go after in this offseason? Now, for me, I do like the idea of working on the trenches of both sides of the football here. We alluded to the right guard situation that Arizona dealt with this past season here. And then on top of that, defensive line, maybe not quite where you want it to be altogether. So there is some work to be done in the trenches on both offense and defense in my eyes. And a lot of other people seem to think so as well when I've done some reading around. Now, first person I have on here, this is a big ticket free agent signing, but one that I think will pay dividends for this offense. And that's going to be going after right guard Trey Smith from Kansas City. First and foremost, coming off of one of the best seasons he's had career-wise, and with the way the salary cap is kind of situated over in Kansas City, this is one of those guys that feels like he probably ends up walking. I have seen the scenario of like potentially him getting tagged and traded by Kansas City. I don't really know how realistic that is of an idea, but I have seen it, and I've seen it in more than one places. So I don't know. This is one of those things where I just think the numbers don't really make sense for Kansas City, and they're probably going to have to opt to let him walk just because their money is tied up in so many other places. That being said, you look at the situation at right guard in Arizona last year, Will Hernandez going down in week number 5, and he's nearly 30 coming off of a season-ending injury. So even if you liked Hernandez there at that spot, it is something you need to consider with his age and the type of injury that he dealt with. You had 3rd-round pick Isaiah Adams, who did eventually come in to see some playing time in his place, but I don't really think you ever found a suitable solution to the loss of Hernandez at any point during the season. And for me, this is about fortifying an offensive line that has a guy behind them in James Conner, the ageless James Conner, I should say, who continues to find success. And if you bring in a guy like Trey Smith, who can absolutely fight through with the best of them on the offensive line, you're only going to potentially push the production that James Conner has even further. And it really is impressive what he's doing at this point in his career and what he's done to this point, despite Arizona not having a ton over the last few years that he's been in Arizona around him to take attention away. So with people maybe starting to catch on at this point with what he can do, what better way than to help him out and help out your offense altogether by fortifying that offensive line up front. And none for nothing, when it comes to run blocking, good guy. When it comes to pass blocking, also a good guy. He's 26 years old. This is someone that you bring in and he's playing right guard for you for the next 5, 6, 7 years as long as things continue to go well and he avoids injury. If you want to fortify this offensive line, I think Trey Smith is that guy. Yes, the number is a little bit high. Spotrac's looking at basically $20 million per year on a 4-year deal, something like that. So you're looking at $80 million or more altogether when it's all said and done. But you could maybe get that number a little bit lower if you give him more guarantees now. You know he's playing well now, so load up some guarantees up front, and it helps deal with the salary cap number. And like I had previously alluded to, with the salary cap pushing potentially north of $280 million, yeah, $20 million a year is a lot, and it might sound like a lot for an offensive guard, but that's just kind of the nature of the way contracts are going these days. And in 4 years' time, if you sign him to that 4-year, maybe even a 5-year deal, if you really want to lock him up, into that first year of his 30s, this $20 million per year, when we get to 2028, 2029, is going to literally look like a bargain when it's all said and done. And that's kind of that's the price you pay. Things look astronomical initially this day and age, but 2, 3, 4 years, as that salary cap just continues to balloon higher and higher. It's jumped $53 million over the last 2 years alone. These contracts look much smaller than they did even just 2 or 3 years ago as each passing year goes by. So go fortify that O-line, help out Kyler Murray, help out James Conner, and help out what is a young and budding offense right now in Arizona. On the flip side, we'll stick with the trenches, but defensive this time. And I struggled with this one here because I want to see improvement along the defensive front over there in Arizona. I want to see them be able to get more pressure and get after the quarterback, bring him down. The way Arizona ranked out last season, you were basically middle of the pack in pressure rate, sacks altogether. I want to see them go from middle of the pack to maybe even to the top third of the NFL, somewhere within maybe that top 12. And this is somebody that I weighed for a while with Arizona because I wasn't necessarily sure how people would react to this, but his last 2 years of play have at least been pretty good, where I feel like he's far enough removed from some of the injuries that he dealt with the second and third year of his career that it seems like he's getting himself back on track. And if you bring him in, you lock him in long-term for the next 3, maybe 4 years, and he just gets to continue to develop within your system, I think this could be a fantastic signing. And I am looking at defensive end Chase Young. Now, bear with me, because I know there are some people out there who may not be on board. Last 2 years, he's been healthy. He's looked good. 13 sacks over that span. 7.5 a year ago, now 5.5 this past season. He has looked fairly good. Maybe not necessarily the level of his draft position pedigree, but he has looked pretty good over the last couple of years nonetheless. And he's been doing a lot of bouncing around in that process. If you bring him in here and you look at some of the numbers, in 2024, career best, 73 pressures, and on top of that, career best pressure rate at 16.2%, 26 defensive stops as well. All those numbers courtesy of NFL Pro, second most of his career on the defensive stops. It's clear that he is finding his footing and getting back on track to probably where he was supposed to be going as a premier edge setter in the NFL. So I look at the deal that he's potentially going to get, and Spotrac has him listed for about $17.5 million per year for 4 years. I think that realistically speaking, the 4 years is kind of a lot, and maybe even the 17.5 is a little bit a lot. I kind of look back to the deal that the Vikings gave Marcus Davenport in 2023, a 1-year, $13 million deal, as something more along the lines of where you could expect to see Chase Young's numbers settle. Maybe he gets something like a 2 or 3 year deal where the third year is pretty much like a wash and you can let him go if it does not work out. But when you look at his age, where he's going to be 26 going into the season right now, you get him on that 3-year deal. Maybe you're paying him 15, 16 million. I really don't think it's going to reach that 17.5 million mark. I just feel like that number's a little bit high for the production altogether. But if you bring him in here, it's kind of a no-brainer. I do think it's an improvement on the defensive front. Yes, there's going to be a little bit of a positional shift because he's naturally been a defensive end throughout his career, but he's going to have to be a pass rushing outside linebacker should he come into Arizona with the 3-4 that you run over there in Arizona. But I think the talent is there. He is now far enough removed from the injury-riddled couple of seasons he dealt with in 21 and 22, where he's shown that he can still be productive, and he's gotten his career back on track to this point now. And you look at the Saints' salary cap hell, it feels like he's probably all but guaranteed to be out of there at this point. And it seems like every year the Saints have to let people walk. They have to cut a ton of guys as well just to get under the salary caps. And it feels like Chase Young could be potential, especially with all the changes going on over there coaching-wise as well. He feels like an odd man out. He should be available. He's young enough, and I trust what they're doing over there in Arizona, that if they brought him in, they could probably maximize his talents, and he probably becomes your best pass rusher in all things considered. Is he the best option available? Maybe not, but I'm doing a series of just different teams right now. This is the 4th team I'm doing at this point. I gave Josh Sweat to the New England Patriots already, so I couldn't go and bring him into Arizona, so I'm sorry, Cardinals fans. I already have him positioned to go somewhere else. He is somebody that if you get into a bidding war with the Patriots and you can win, I'm all in on. This is like if you can't win the Josh Sweat sweepstakes, which will be hard for anyone that's trying to get into a bidding war with the Patriots, who have basically half of the salary cap to work with because they're not paying anybody at this current point. I like the idea of a younger Chase Young who over the last couple of seasons has really put it back together career-wise. And then the last person that I have on this list here, and this is one that we alluded to earlier when we were talking about bringing back Kaiser White, the guy who has played a lot better against the run than maybe dropping back in coverage last season. But how about a linebacker coming from Miami? He was in Buffalo prior to that, Tyrel Dodson. This is a guy that I think if you pair on the inside alongside Kaiser White, you get a guy like White who is just a missile, able to get in there and blow up the run if need be. And then Dodson, who's no slouch against the run himself, but is very, very good at dropping back into coverage. He had 3 interceptions last season and only a 72 quarterback rating allowed, which is, in my eyes, a great number for an inside linebacker. So Spotrac estimating for him to net something like $5 million per year on a 3-year deal. We talked about it as well. Over $280 million potentially. And if it's not, like the low end numbers like 276 or 277, I think. So you're looking at basically $280 million to spend on your football team. You're going to tell me you have a problem with giving a guy like Tyrel Dodson, who's still young as well, $5 million per year to drop back and pass in coverage and potentially pick the ball off 3 or more times for you. It seems like he's coming off the best season of his career, and it really feels like he's starting to find his footing. And there's enough that Miami has dealt with some issues that I feel like maybe there's going to be a little bit of a roster reset, especially defensively over there. And while Dodson did look good in Miami, and I wouldn't be shocked to see him retained in Miami if he does become available, a guy like Tyrel Dodson is the pairing that I have in mind for somebody to work alongside Kaiser White. So if it's not Dodson, it's somebody else who, again, can drop back into coverage, be effective. It doesn't have to be the best inside linebacker in coverage in the NFL, but it's a guy that can come in, he can be effective. And again, Dodson is a good mix. He can drop back. He can get after the quarterback. He had 2.5 sacks last year. He had 56 defensive stops last year. Only, 7 short of what Kaiser White had himself at 63. So low cost, but improvement to the defensive front over there in Arizona. And he ends up being a beautiful pairing alongside the strengths of what we saw from Kaiser White in year number 1 in Arizona if he gets brought back as well. But those are my thoughts, my opinions on free agency for the Cardinals. I want to hear from you all, you Cardinals fans. Fire away. Let me know. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Is there anyone else you would like to see? Fire away. We can all discuss. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.